Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to look at a technique that I like to do. It's called mapping of the consciousness. Now, this is different from creating a holographic mapping system. That's a kind of different kettle of fish altogether, which I will get into at certain points when I feel ready enough to kind of talk about that. Um, because the holographic mapping system is about kind of movement through the universe, through the Merkaba. This is mapping your consciousness or mapping through a trauma. So this technique is really great to use when trying to understand the thread or the timeline or the trajectory from one kind of trigger point that then we want to route it all the way back to its origin. So what I like to kind of do with this is I have a kind of set of questions that I tend to go through that usually roll off my tongue as I'm kind of doing it. So I don't actually, I might have some that will roll off my tongue in a bit. Um, I hope so, because that would be really helpful, I think, actually. So the aim of this is to trace the information from the trigger point all the way back to the origin. And what we want to do is understand the schisms in which the consciousness may have fragmented further along the way or how it has impacted you today. Um, Now, not everybody is going to have the ability to take it as far back as possible yet. But what we can do is start with the ones that are present day, the triggers that come up on a daily basis. And what we want to do is just start to open that up so we can see that as a kind of a blockage point or a point of entry, really. So through that, we kind of identify the emotions, we identify the themes, and we identify the belief systems. And as we kind of start to decompress the emotions around this, this may then open a memory of about, as an example, 5 years ago. And what we want to do here is understand what actually happened within that memory, what actually happened in that scene to create the trigger point or to reinforce the trigger point of the present day situation. Now, as we kind of open this situation 5 years ago, I have done a video on healing the aspect. What I would recommend is going to take a look at that and start to process that aspect via the method in that video. Because what this will do is it starts to kind of clear out the backlog of emotional charge that connects into the present day trigger. But what it can also do, which may feel like a bit of a sidestep, is open up 3 or 4 other scenes and scenarios that are contributing that have generated into this 5 years ago trigger point. Now, what we can see here is we've got a kind of estuary of consciousness that's kind of opening, or we're looking at a root, a tree branch or a root of consciousness to kind of trace it back to the source point. Now, that source point may present within the trunk of the tree, for example. What we want to do is start to understand the themes within these different components of the memory that built up into this 5 years ago memory and see what the belief systems are that contributed towards that schism 5 years before. Now, as we go through the process, we can then start to repair and heal the initiate points. Now, when we get down to that break off of about three different things as an example, this may then start to take us up the dimensional scale. It may take us further into past lives. It may take us to like a core point within our childhood, which will then initiate the kind of understanding as to, okay, this was the starting point in my third dimensional reality, my physical life of this time. This was how that's kind of translated into there. But what it will also do is it will open up a history in the back, which we can ask the question of what is the furthest point? What is the origin point beyond this life for where this trauma and belief system has occurred. And when we've kind of got that, we can then start to heal and restore, but also maintain the documentation of that trajectory so we can kind of get an understanding about how much it's still impacting us today. Now, as we've got all that information, we can then go in and start to use the healing, the aspect techniques to rehabilitate and repair these past experiences in order to gain a conscious awareness and a measuring of the impact of the trauma. So once we can kind of get that and we can see, as a child, this really affected me, but as an adult now, I've healed it this much. I feel like I can manage so much better, and I feel like I can kind of identify the traumas as it kind of comes in, or the trigger as it comes in, to be able to deal with it in a different way. So the mapping system, the mapping of your consciousness is a really useful tool to document the extensions of the trauma. Now, when you get kind of comfortable with that, you can begin to create a dimensional scale of information to see how it kind of impacts the different levels of the mind that correlate to the 12 dimensions of matter, or pre-matter to matter. And with this, what we can start to track in that consciousness is what are the external influences that are blending through into your consciousness that are impacting you from that original trauma point. So we can start to open up the perspective that it's just not this trauma that's happened in the third dimensional reality, but there may be contributing factors that are also playing through within the history that are also influencing your energy system. And the documentation of it, once you have the document of your consciousness, it begins to update the boundaries of defense and the kind of security levels. So this is really great, because when you have an awareness of it, things can't really kind of get in. They can to some degree, but until you kind of repeat, and build the security and build the awareness of it, where it can't affect you anymore through the understanding, this is really the kind of way to gain back your sovereignty in the long run. Now, myself, I love doing it. I love mapping my consciousness because I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to the mechanics side of the consciousness and how it kind of works. Some people may not find it useful to kind of work in that way. But fundamentally, once you've kind of got the truth within your map, it kind of sits in your field anyway, because it's corrected and updated. And then the kind of architecture and the morphogenetic memory of the history will sit in place as it's meant to, really. It doesn't kind of fade away. It, apart from the memory, doesn't always work like our 3D memory or kind of like linear memory like we're used to. It now just kind of sits there, but phases in when it needs to come in and phases out when it's not needed. But it still ultimately sits in the morphogenetic memory. And it's always accessible when it's kind of needed. So the mapping system helps categorize and organize the consciousness, categorize and organize the dimensions or the dimensional information in order to kind of maximize on the healing, I would say. So yeah, that's what I've got to say on that one for now. So yeah, I'll Love you and leave you, and I'll look forward to seeing you again very soon. You take care, everyone. Bye.